Genealogy is the study of family history. It is finding out who your ancestors were and documenting each generation, working back to the earliest that you can find. It starts out, I think, just a curiosity to find out where you came from. And then, of course, for some people it just becomes a bit of an obsession, you know. Once you find 2 grandparents and then it's a couple of great-grandparents and you keep going back and you just want to keep filling in and finding out who all of these people were. It certainly appeals to the detective in people. So the National Archives Genealogy Advisory Service is staffed by a panel of professional, experienced genealogists. So we've been doing this for a long time, and we can really take on a range of different queries. So we can help you decide where to go, where to start looking, how to look, that method of research, and help you be sort of efficient and make sure you've found the right people and where to go to keep looking for more information about your ancestors. It's also entirely free, so there is no cost involved. And as I said, so many records are also entirely freely available online. For most people, the first place to start is actually talk to your family. And, you know, if you can, if there are people still around that would have that knowledge, and just start gathering what they know. We would advise them to work methodically back through each generation, because it's too easy sometimes to maybe pick up the wrong person, and you could spend a year researching somebody else's family, missing out on your own. Births, deaths and marriages, for example, which is the bread and butter and really the starting point for Irish genealogy, contains so much detail. Get the original certificate, because it's going to tell you what occupation the father of the child had, what address the family lived at, who the person was that registered the birth, which may have been an aunt or a grandmother. All of these little details are really important in painting a picture of who your ancestors were. So the 1901 and the 1911 census, again freely available online on the website of the National Archives of Ireland, will tell you people's occupations, their religion, their literacy, their marital status. But there's also additional detail in relation to the house that they lived in. So it's going to tell you whether they lived in a 2-roomed house with a thatched roof, but 12 people lived in the house together, or a tenement building that's been divided up between 6 families and houses something like 50 people. So all those details, all of a sudden, you can see children running up and down the steps in a tenement building where there's maybe 12 or 14 of them from different families. And that, again, just paints the picture of what their life might have been like, and perhaps how different it is from the lives that we live today. There have been genealogists around for a really long time, and that would have been to serve the landed classes who needed to prove their sort of hereditary rights to titles. However, I think it's really the advent of the internet that has really changed genealogy, particularly Irish genealogy, because all of a sudden it's made records accessible to people all over the world. And when you consider that Ireland has this diaspora that can be found almost everywhere in the world, those people now have an opportunity to access Irish records and really start investigating their family history. The big loss, I think, for genealogists was the destruction of the 19th century census returns. So there was a census taken in Ireland every 10 years, starting in 1821. So the returns for 61, 71, 81 and 91 were pulped, we believe, during the First World War because of a paper shortage. And of course, 6 years later, the remaining returns, 21, 31, 41 and 51, were destroyed in the Public Record Office fire. So a lot of genealogy records have been made available online. 1901 and 1911 census, births, deaths and marriages, Catholic parish registers, land records and so on. There's material that was destroyed in 1922, for which we have some substitutes like wills and testamentary records. A large number of Church of Ireland records were also destroyed in 1922, but they relate to sort of a much smaller proportion of the population. As your research progresses, you're probably going to find that there are other sources you want to look at, but that they're not available online. So for example, national school records are held in the National Archives of Ireland. A list of national school teachers from 1905 has recently been published online, but there's a wealth more material behind that relating to the establishment of schools, the employment of teachers, and even roll books for children in schools that are on site here. There's things like court records, records relating to the Ordnance Survey, and even just records relating to the administration of the state. So people who might have been employed in the civil service, employment records for them might be found here. So there's a lot more material on site, and again, that's another question that it's worth asking the genealogist or the archivist on duty as to what's here that might tell me more about my ancestor who was a policeman or who worked for Customs and Excise or the Inland Revenue, or who might have been a national school teacher. The genealogists who provide this service in the National Archives are all really passionate about what they do, and they get excited for you about the journey you're just about to head off on, and are more than delighted to be able to kind of give you advice and assistance with the records, with finding them, with interpreting them, reading them. You know, there's a lot of old handwriting in there that can be difficult to deal with. We've been doing it for many years and have a good eye for it generally. And so any question is fine. It's an enormous jigsaw puzzle, and you're slowly putting the pieces together to build up a picture of who people are. And for me, you know, holding somebody's birth certificate in my hand is when they start to come to life. Like, one of my favourites is a marriage certificate that I found for a girl who was described as a wandering dairymaid. Now for me, that was, whether it was true or not, this was a young woman wandering the countryside with 2 milk pails in her hand who stumbled across a fine young man. For me, those little pieces, those little details bring a person to life, and not just for my own family history, but for everybody else that I encounter for their family history. I do get excited about what I'm finding for other people. If you're setting out on this journey, you are going to be the author of your family history. You know, your family history doesn't exist in a book that I can take off the shelf and say, well, here you go. I mean, it's the case for the kings and queens and lords and ladies, but not for most of us. So it becomes a really personal quest, I think, for people. You're finding people that have essentially been lost. You know, they're in the records, but nobody knows they're there until you pluck them out and represent them in the context of your family history. So all of that, I think, makes it a very important and emotional journey for people, and something that is their legacy.